Good afternoon and welcome to episode 8 of season 3 of the Van Dyke Mortgage West Michigan Sports Podcast, brought to you by Durgan Insurance Group. We're live from the CatchMark Podcast room in our Whitehall office. I'm host Scott DeCamp, joined by fellow co-hosts Ken Byard and Cody Kater. How are you doing today, gentlemen?
Good.
Good. Nice to see some sunshine.
Yeah, I'm trying to shake off the dust from last night's Super Bowl.
Even though we're blocking out the sunshine there.
Right.
Yeah, I fell asleep like in the second half.
What?
It was a great game.
It was a great game.
I spent more time prepping the food and eating the food than I did watching the game, I think.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
I got you working too hard here, or what? What do we? Like,
yeah, you know how Brent is.
should we throw that out there?
Yeah, we should.
I just thought we'd put that in the universe. Yeah.
He'll say they bring it on myself.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Which maybe that's true too. But
Right.
I was up at 1:30 a.m. Sunday getting the pork butt in the smoker.
Oh, solid.
How'd it go though?
It was fantastic. I put photos on Facebook on it. You'll have to check them out. But
Like you have
I
it
got
dialed
a bunch
in?
of leftovers. I should have brought it. Should have brought some in.
Do you have a nice little formula? Like, could you
I mean, you can't mess it up.
Okay,
I mean,
so-
maybe I can, but it turned out really good.
Okay.
Is that a Traeger? You smoked it?
It's not. It is, but it's. I can't even think the Mastercraft or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't know. I don't even know if that's what it's called. It's just an electric one.
Yeah, it just smokes
You
meat.
can't
That's
mess
all
it
you
up.
need.
That's
Right.
one of those things. So enough about that. Let's welcome our guest. It's Daniel Hunt, or should we call you Danny Hunt? Which do you prefer?
Dan's good.
Okay.
Yep.
As those close to, I know you call him Danny.
Right.
You have to call him
A little
Danny?
bit here and there, but in front of people, I think Daniel.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, or Dan.
A little more formal.
Yeah.
Well, Dan is a human performance and organizational consultant for Meraki Performance. He's a Whitehall alumnus, class of 2008. Thanks for joining us, Danny.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
So before we dive into this, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. Grieve Law, West Michigan Joint Divorce Lawyers, Big Stone Therapies, Green Ridge Realty with Chris Dykman and Sarah Reel, North Grove Brewers, Foundation Systems of Michigan and John Botten, Coldwell Banker with Dave Duesenberry, Scheid Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, and then a special thanks to our title sponsors, Van Dyke Mortgage Lakeshore. You can find them at 460 West Western Avenue in Muskegon. You can also give them a call at 231-332-6500. And then also Durgan Insurance Group. Find them at 1535 Fire Road, North Shores, or you can call them at 231-744-9106. And again, as a reminder, please hit those like and subscribe buttons on our CatchMark SportsNet YouTube channel where you're viewing this. Please make sure you like and follow us on our social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. We do have a guest with us, Timothy Miller, who's with us every week. We appreciate that, Tim. And he beat me to the punch because I was just going to ask for comments, and we have our first one, but he just says, "Good afternoon, fellas." So thanks a lot for joining us again, Tim. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, let's dive into this with Dan Hunt. Whitehall alumnus, what sports did you grow up playing?
Yeah, so mostly tennis was my big sport. Played a little bit of soccer, basketball, pickup hockey, things like that, but for the most part it was tennis.
I think, and then when you went off after Whitehall as well, what kind of gravitated towards like, hey, I want to kind of pursue, the coaching aspect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was, I wasn't the greatest athlete, right? Like I wasn't the all-star, I wasn't the big guy, I wasn't the fast guy, but I loved just battling, And so right after high school, I got the opportunity to play for Grand Rapids Community College and enjoyed that. That was my only path into college, I didn't think about going to college, but that gave me the opportunity. Left there and ended up working at Norton Pines, where I really started just falling in love with coaching and teaching people, right? And after working there for a while, decided like, hey, man, I'm going to go up to this Ferris State PTM program. I was like 22, 23 at the time, and got involved with that and really just found my niche of coaching tennis. I loved tennis myself. Like one of my greatest influences was my grandfather, and he played tennis and got me into tennis. So one of the last things he said to me before he passed away was like, if there was anything I could do differently in life, and he did tons of things, like raised 6 kids, my grandma never worked, had a sailboat, owned part of a plane. He was like, I would be a tennis professional. Like I would teach people tennis. I was like, all right, man, I'll give this a shot, I just fell in love with it. It was kind of my niche. And then I ended up getting the opportunity to coach at Ferris State. So I spent a couple seasons up there coaching, came in as an assistant coach. And, I don't know if you guys know much about college tennis or tennis in general, especially it's a worldwide sport, obviously, but most great schools are down in Florida, Texas, California. Like, we were not getting the cream of the crop, you would say, tennis players at Ferris State. So we knew one of our things was we were going to recruit internationally, and we were really going to focus in on the mental side of things. And so the head coach at the time was like, hey, man, start diving into this. And as I started diving into it, I loved it. You know, one of the things that I did first was taking over our strength and conditioning, you know, and we were in the weight room, and Ferris State has this like dungeon of a weight room. Not anymore.
Nothing like now.
Yeah, not anymore.
Impressive.
Yeah. But we called it the Rocky Balboa Gym because it was just old weights and everything. And I remember I would bring in a piece of mental toughness type stuff, you know, things I was reading, things I was researching. And we had this kid, Till von Winning, right? He was from Germany. Von Winning was why we recruited him, like the last name. He was a great kid, but we were doing just this like burnout at the end of it, and I made everybody do wall sits, right? It was after a leg workout. And so as they're doing it, like everybody's falling 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4, and this, you know, Till's just sitting there on the wall. You know, I'm like, what, dude? Like, we're at 8 minutes, man. We can shut this down. He's like, no, coach, I got this, you know? And I'm like, no, we can shut this. And like, we're at 10 minutes now, and he's just locked in. And I knew there, like, there is something different with this kid, and it's more the mental side than anything. And he just produced for us. He did it time and time again. And from that point on, I just fell in love with the mental side of sports and just performance in general.
What type of environment did he
just cut Ken off? I'm sorry.
Had a really deep thought. Clap back.
Messing around over here.
Like, what type of environment did he come from? Like, why? Like, did you dive into his environment to like understand like why is he able to perform, you know, like that compared to other athletes that were maybe falling out at 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you know, reflecting on that now, one of the things that was unique about Till specifically was that he had strokes, right? Like, because he's international, we were looking at his video, right? But he didn't have results really. Okay, so we were looking at these, and he had a huge serve, and the last name, Von Winning, we were like, hey, man, we'll give this a shot, you know?
Can't be a loser.
Right. And so, you know, when he came, and looking back, hindsight 2020, and this is one of the things that I have realized in my experience doing this for 10 years now, is that he had a strong sense of just who he was. You know what I mean? Like, he went out there and competed because it was just in his bones. It was who he was. He knew that he represented our team, and you just could never count the kid out. You know, I remember we were in the Sweet 16 match, and he was down, I'm pretty sure it was down match point. So the other player had match point on him. If this player wins this point, we're out of the tournament, right? This is 2015, I think. Until running as fast as he could, hits a backhand down the line, which running and changing directions in tennis is probably two of the harder things to do. And he just threads the needle, hits it on the line. I mean, like ice in his veins, you know? And he was just, yeah, that's me, man. You know, and that's just how he was. And I think more than anything, it was just this strong sense of self. He knew who he was.
So I'm going to dive right in because it's just really good stuff. So I'm going to just take a step back. You said your grandpa owned part of a plane?
Yeah. So the story that I was told is that it was just like a Cessna, right? A small plane. But my grandfather was a huge influence on me. So one of the things that at a young age, he always taught me good, better, best. Never let them rest till the good is the better and the better is the best, right? And I never really grabbed the whole context of that until I probably got into my 20s. Was like, that's what life's about. You know, life's about experiencing what you do and then trying to get better and better with each experience you have, you know? And so, you know, there's tons of stories about my grandfather. He, you know, raised 6 kids. At one point he was working a job, didn't want to work it anymore, and just said, I'm done. Like, I trust myself. I'll figure it out. Like, I'll provide, you know? He built a house on the lake. He wanted to live on the lake. My grandmother wanted to live on the lake. So he was like, let's build a house on the lake, you know, and he just did it. And he wanted to fly a plane. So he ended up learning how to fly a plane and bought part of a plane. My grandmother never rode with him because she was like, if we crash, like we both can't go down. Right? But he was just that guy. I mean,
like a Renaissance man.
Yeah, man. He wanted.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he wanted to. You know, he wanted to explore. He wanted to do different things. He owned a sailboat and wanted to live on the sailboat, so they did. You know,
it's a free spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's Yeah, I mean, that's been a huge influence in my life of like, hey, if I want to do something, I'm going to go do it.
That's cool.
You know?
So you've been doing this for what, 10 years, you said now? A little bit longer?
Collectively.
Right. And so you said something earlier about the tennis kid. You said it was in his bones, right?
Yeah.
And so are you seeing a fundamental difference in kids from 10 years ago or when you started doing this till now? And I think about it from an educator standpoint, like, they always say that the kids don't change. And I'm starting to wonder if that statement's true anymore with social media and phones and how the rewiring of the brains and how kids are learning and all the information that's just thrown at them 24/7. Do you see a fundamental difference in kids now compared to 10 years ago or, when you first started coaching?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you first have to think like we adapt and we're flexible. We're going to adapt. We're going to flex in and out of different things. We're going to do what we feel is best, right? So I think that, yes, are we seeing a major difference? We're still wanting the external recognition to some degree, right? We still want the community and the cohesiveness or me belonging to something, because we've always wanted that. As humans, we were born for community. I think the reality is that kids are not finding that, or it's harder to create that in a team. It's harder to create that in the school. It's harder to create that even within families, right? Because where they're getting that recognition, where they're getting that validation or reward is in social media. And a lot of times it's much more immediate than they're getting with their friends face to face, or they're getting with even their families, or you could say churches and the schools. So they're still seeking the same things.
Right.
I just think now it's more social media than anything.
Right.
Which I think, yes, it is changing the landscape.
Just harder to expose it. I mean, just harder to like get that in front of them that like, hey, you might actually benefit from being on a team.
Absolutely.
Right. I think like, and that piece of it, just like in my world as well. I mean, we're seeing it more and more that like, I don't know if I want to play football, because of the stigma of football. That's what it used to be like. And now it's a little bit more like, no, I'd just rather maybe not be on a team because I have no idea what it means like to be on a team. I'd rather maybe do an individual sport, or I'd rather just not be a part of it and go work, or something along those lines. That seems like too much trouble to like hang out with groups of people and have to like understand their feelings. Mm-hmm. But now it's starting to turn into a moment where it's like, where they do get that validation, of like, hey, hard work together. This is a lot of fun. There's like a whole different type of endorphins being released and adrenaline being released than ever before. But it's hard to get them to actually understand that and come together. Like, and that's where you come in play. Like, what have you, been doing within the last like 2 years of like when you're building your brand and where you're having to pivot the most? Like, where do you see that at?
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to like you talking about the groups, right? And the reality that, I believe greatness happens from a place of identity. It's like self-awareness. I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm bad at, and I accept those things, and I'm just going to put myself out there. I'm just going to do it, right? The other thing is it happens in community, right? Like you can't name anybody in the history of anything that did something solely on their own and had no other influence. Anything great. Like you can even think of painters and musicians. Like there was influences that helped them become the best that they could be. You know what I mean? And then it's that singular focus. And when you have those things, you have the endorphins, you have the dopamine, you have the oxytocin of being in a group of people. And those are all good things that a human needs to be at their peak. You know what I mean? But to go back to your point,
yeah. So how do you get them? Like you're bringing the horse to the water, but you can't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like so, how do you get them to understand that at a more efficient or effective rate?
Yeah. So like for any coach or leader, like the first thing you have to do is if you can capture them and get them in that space, you have to take them from this space of pre-contemplation, like I don't know if there's a better way or a better feeling or a better thought or whatever it is, to maybe there is. Right? Like we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Like, what's the hook, right? Mm-hmm. Hook them on something. And then if you can get them like, oh, maybe there is a better way or something different. now I might put effort into the change that needs to take place, maybe. You know what I mean? But like kids not wanting to come out to football, not wanting to do those things, right? It's a lot of times it's that fear of, well, will I be accepted? Because we all want to be accepted, right? And so it's like, are these people going to accept me? Am I going to be the odd man out? Like, how can I come together in a group? And that could be another thing as a coach, even teammates. How are you bringing people in, right? You see the new guy that wants to be a part of your group, like, bring him in, man. Get to know him. High five, like something.
Yeah, that's one of the, I guess, two parts as Scott just left us. He had a little coughing fit.
Yep.
Rookies.
It's February.
Right. So you mentioned influences, right? And so you can't do great things by yourself. Who were or still are some of your major influences? You mentioned your grandpa being one of them.
Yep.
And then two, not related, getting kids to like come out and be parts of teams and getting that feeling of family and community. The one of the things that I'm finding is that kids are afraid of failure, right? And that it's instantly exposed because, and the thing that comes to my mind is basketball. Like kids don't want to play man to man because they might get shook, and now it's on a highlight thing when in fact the guy maybe didn't even score. He maybe just made you fall, but like they don't even want to like go up against a person and take that risk of failure and being exposed. And so how do you kind of hook them into thinking it's okay to fail, right? And you put them, I'm assuming, in situations where they can and it's safe. And we want our schools to be those safe places and our families to be those safe places and teams to be those safe places. So I guess kind of two unrelated topics, influences and then the fighting that fear of failure.
Yeah. I think another influence was a gentleman named Rocky Risinga. So I was in a space and time just trying to make ends meet, young father, and he worked down at My Auto Import Center, and he got me selling cars with him. And I hated it because I saw no value in cars, but this guy was awesome, and he was a guy that really I watched him in his mindset, and just he would find the positives all the time, right? And you would see a situation and you could see that he would switch his mind about things and look at it from a light that he would be able to move through it and produce, like, I'm going to move through this, right? It's not going to hinder anything. One of the things he was like, every day, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, you're climbing a mountain, right? And when we would face tough situations, he'd be like, this is just a hill for a climber. Like, this ain't a mountain, this is just a hill, And he was a huge influence for me of just, in any situation, how do you change your mindset and look at it differently? Because a lot of life is that matter of perspective.
Perspective, right?
It is. You and I could experience the exact same thing. We could go get in the same car accident, right? And I could walk away and go, oh man, that wasn't that bad. And you could be going to therapy for the next 6 weeks.
Right.
Like it's that matter of perspective.
Right.
I think the other thing too is my wife. Like I was a young coach. Again, I wasn't the greatest athlete, so I think, getting into coaching, I had something to prove. Like I can produce, I can do these things. And so I was really driven, and I was not relational really at all. And my wife has really pulled that nurturing side of me, and she's helped me be a better father, where a lot of, you guys are experiencing coach it and things like that. And I'm experiencing with the kids I'm coaching, but also with my kids all the time, and just being in tune with that. And I think the other thing too is, self-awareness comes from having conversations, right? Which kids are not having face-to-face conversations. And my wife really pulled that out of me. Like, who are you? Who are we? Where are we going? And that allowed me 10 years of being able to be this guy. Like, this is just who I am, man. You either accept it or you don't.
Well, thanks for keeping it rolling. I had a little battle with the coughs.
It went way smoother the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, for some reason when I stepped away. So a little coughing fit, but I'm back in the saddle now. But you guys are doing a good job, and hopefully you guys maybe you covered it already, maybe you didn't. But the word Meraki, like what's the origin of it, and what are the origins of the business? Yeah,
so. That's it. The word Meraki is actually a Greek word, which there's no translation for. So it basically means to do something with such purpose and intention that you leave a piece of yourself behind. So this idea of when I give myself fully to something, that there's a legacy there, right? And then there's also like just life is lived that space. So really, I believe that there's three things that really tie into Meraki, and it's the idea of purpose. Like you have a singular focus in what your intention is in any given situation, or maybe just direction in life. What you're doing, you're finding extreme fulfillment in, like it's filling your cup and you're just overflowing, right? And then you're able to do it from a place of originality or authenticity, And when those three things happen, you have this, almost flow state, right? When you're thinking of performance, you're in the zone, and you just lose track of time. And there's a lot of research behind, when you're in the flow state, you have clear goals. You're just manageable tasks, right? You have just manageable tasks. You lose this sense of time. Your ego is not attached, right? And then when you come back, you have this confidence of like, and I'm sure athletes that are hearing this, even coaches, former athletes, have experienced that both in wins and losses, where you walk away and you're like, like there's like I feel different now. You know what I mean? And so that's really where Meraki came from. Was just that in my years of both competing and then coaching, it was like this is where performance is. And then I actually wrote the guy's name down, but it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, right? I even like because it's really difficult. But this guy has done. He's done immense amount of research on flow, and it started in the performance arts, and then it transitioned into a little bit more sports, But yeah, like that's been really big and influential in what I've done as well.
How did you recognize this, that you wanted the research flow?
Yeah.
Like how did you like what experiences did you have as a coach, like at Ferris or wherever you're at, where you finally like you recognize like there is something here that like it just keeps drawing me back, that ultimately led you to research. I'm not going to try to butcher that guy's name there, but like to the flow piece, like that you wanted you recognize something about that, these moments in time that you're like, hey, I really want to know what this is about, and someone has to have more information than me. Yeah. Like when or how or when did that, kind of happen? Yeah,
I think it was, I was never a great runner, and I was living on Mackinac Island, and I was working as the director of tennis for the Grand Hotel. And I was going through some things in life that like I just didn't know how to navigate, right? Just logically could not navigate. And I started running. And I remember running like a mile on the west side and coming back, and then a little bit further and coming back. And I remember just going further and further. And then about a month into the summer, I'm running 8 miles 3 to 4 times a week around this island, and like just in the zone, man, and feeling so good about it. And I realized then, like, even somebody who's not a great runner can experience this. And I had that confidence. And I remember being in those moments of like, it was like, just one more step. And reflecting back in my life, it's like, it's just one more step. Just keep going. So I had that clear goal. And I was getting the immediate feedback, right? Like I was going further. I was seeing new things. I was finishing all around the island, And so as I started having that, I started saying, like, what other spaces can I find this in? Okay. And I began to do that in the morning times. Like I've had a routine for 5 years, for about 10 years now, that I'm up at 5 a.m. And I spend the first hour and a half on my own. I'm thinking, I'm meditating, I'm reading the Bible, I'm journaling. Like I'm finding a way to like, who am I? And continuing to reflect and refine on that and just getting in that zone. And the other thing is I try to make as many decisions in that hour and a half about how I'm going to navigate my day, so that when the day goes on, like I'm ready to roll. It's more of I'm making decisions and interacting with you guys, and that's where my energy is, than what I'm going to eat for dinner. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Did you find like a passion in communicating this and teaching this and educating this to like your peers or your other people? Like how is that how it led you to the Meraki piece of like sport, mental performance?
Yeah, I think being at Ferris, I realized like it was enjoyable. Just coaching, transferring information, and seeing people transform is very rewarding. The other thing is, you guys as coaches know too, like you're in a mirror, like you're in front of them, and if you're not living out what you're saying, like they're gonna call you out,
Yeah,
dude.
you're a fraud.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kids
then-
pick up on that quick.
Right.
credibility and you're a fraud.
Yeah.
Those are words that are often used
Yeah.
back at me nowadays. Yeah, sound like a fraud, coach.
Right.
But yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think I realized that I just had, good, better, best, never let it rest. So the good is the better and the better is the best. The essence of that was I need to be better today than I was yesterday. And it's not just about me. It's about my kids. It's about my wife. And then I know the highest form of understanding is teaching. So if I can be teaching this and giving this to other people, not only am I impacting and helping their lives, but I'm also holding that mirror up constantly. Are you living out who you're trying, to develop them to be, and who you say you are?
So in those days that you weren't better that day than the previous day, what do you do? How do you handle that? What's the talk?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I think it's having humility. And my kids, they'll tell you plenty of times, like, oh, dad don't have it all together. I was talking to my oldest boy, was it yesterday? And we were just talking, and I was like, he was laughing, and I was like, can you believe that dad's the guy that talks to people about keeping their composure? Because I lose my composure. I tell a story recently. My son had appendicitis last Mother's Day, right? And we were in between moving from our house in Big Rapids to Fremont. We're Fremont community members now. And we were living with my mom. And after you're 30, you don't want to live with your mom, right? And so we're living there. It was, long story short, my son, his appendix burst. He had to have it removed. Like, it was a very scary time. We're down in Helen DeVos. We don't know what's going on. My wife's traveling back and forth. I'm working from the hospital. And we get home after like 4 days of not sleeping, and I see a dent in my car, and I lose my mind. I'm like, we can't keep nice things, and I just remember losing it, right? And I tell that story because even me that talks myself through this and I try to mentally prepare, everybody has that point, right? You have that point where it's just too much. And when you snap, you have to take a deep breath. You have to be humble about it, right? Like, I was wrong. I tried to blame it's a dent in a car, man.
Right.
Like, and one of the things I try to tell myself is, what are you putting value in, right? Is the car more important than the relationships? Or like, who cares if it's even a dent? Like, why do you give a dent value or not? Like, it is what it is, And I try to talk myself through that. And then the next morning I'm going, okay, if you face a dent again, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to take a deep breath immediately. I'm going to walk away for a second. I'm going to remind myself that my family's more important than a car. I'm going to, whatever it is, I try to, again, make decisions before I face that tough event. Because if I wait till that event happens, I'm going to react every time, every single time.
I could use some of those lessons myself.
Yeah, those are some pretty practical lessons.
Seriously.
What are some like of your famous failures as a coach though, that like you failed with a conversation or a relationship or whatever that is, and or a lesson, for that practice that ultimately helped you, going forward?
Yeah. I don't want to say any specifics, right?
Right.
You got to use names.
Right, yeah. I want names and dates.
Right. You always reflect and go, how could I have done things better?
Right.
And I think in the early times coaching, I was definitely more like, how can I get the outcome? Right? Like, I'm evaluated on the outcome. The outcome's what matters most. My personality is to be mission focused and driven. And my wife's been a huge influence to kind of peel that back and like, there's people behind fulfilling that mission, that outcome that you really want. And so, I think there's been times, failures where you've cut kids too early. You've said, you know what, I just can't deal with this anymore. You haven't given them the proper chance, right? And maybe, I would even say that I haven't communicated clear expectations well enough. So that kid really didn't know what he was doing. He was just navigating from his experience from wherever it was until he got there, Mm-hmm. And then there's been times where, kids have been a part of the team and they shouldn't have been, right? And you let them go on and on and on and violate the team's safety and rules and trust. And what's going on, but they're a good kid. They're a high performer. And you're like, but yeah, I can get to them, and I've learned when those kids leave, all of a sudden your culture transforms, all of a sudden the kids are like, oh, we're not standing for this. And he was violating that, and coach really does care, but, and all of a sudden you see your whole culture take on a new form.
So culture is a big part of this. What programs, teams that you've worked with really stick out in your mind as having like elite culture?
Yeah. I don't like going into like specific groups, but yeah, I think one of the major ones I can think of right now is a program I work with up at Ferris, and Tia has been a great friend of mine. She's actually one of the reasons why Meraki started. I tell people quite often, like, do something that you love and you don't have to get, like, you would do for free essentially, And I was doing that. I was just working with them because I loved doing this. And she is one that really tries to create a culture of just empowering women, right? And like to be the best they can be in all facets of life. I've now worked and do some work with another organization that one of her former players is running. In that player's like, man, the stuff that coach used to talk, like, I always thought, like, why is she working on personalities and team cohesion and all these things? And now I get it, because this matters in life, and this is what I'm using every single day, So, and I think, yeah, you see a lot of those great coaches that create those cultures of kids wanting to be a part of it. They're compelled. And I think the biggest thing too is that they're showing the vision of what it could be, right? Like, the end goal is not necessarily the championship. The end goal is you're going to be better. You're going to be a new person. You're going to be transformed because of you giving your heart to whatever we're doing here.
A minute ago you were talking about perspective.
Yeah.
That plays into this. Timothy Miller has a comment: every day may not be good, but there's something good in every day. So that kind of, good way to keep things in perspective.
Yeah, completely grounding yourself, right? Like, I always tell my kids, and I tell myself this: bad moments, not bad days. You're going to have bad moments. You're going to, like, life's going to happen. It doesn't happen to you. And so how are you going to navigate that from there? You know what I mean? And if you continue to look at life's happening to me, you're going to keep spiraling, and you're going to find, there's a lot of science and research behind reactor neurons, and you're going to find, it's like you go and buy a red car, you start seeing that same red car, and you're like, oh, there's so many red cars. No, your brain picks it up. It's recognizing it. So, same thing in life. Like, if you're picking up these negative things, your brain's going to keep recognizing it. I
was going to say, how do you get the meathead football coach, to understand, that perspective of that we're not going to be result oriented here, because when we're on the same page, we see teams as, very similar ways. But when I came across, even at Reese Puffer early, it was deer in headlights, like, kind of like, what is this guy talking about? Like, we're going to focus on these things. How do you get that process across to the coaches that you work with?
Yeah, I think something that I try to do is you create experiences, right? And you kind of alluded to that to begin with, is when you capture them, when you have that hook, you have to give them the easy, like, I don't want to say results, but the experience of, when I stay focused on these things, the results take care of themselves. You know what I mean? And so I'd challenge any coach, like, how do you create those micro experiences in your practices? How do you create them in the classroom? How do you create them in film sessions, right? Like, one of the things that, we were talking about strategies and things like that. I would say, if you're a team that's big into film, like, challenge your guys. If you can track the times they're on film, like, start giving awards or recognition for the times they're spending watching film, because it's taken away from Instagram, TikTok, whatever.
Right. So stay on the positive. Don't go, hey, you have to do so many push-ups or sit-ups because you're not watching enough film.
Right. 100%.
It's more of that. Yeah. I agree.
And when you say, hey, don't do TikTok, don't do this, shut this down.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
100%. It's like, right. If I use this quite often, like, don't think of a yellow school bus, right? Everybody thought of a yellow school bus,
Mine was, like, short, but yeah.
And Scott was on it.
It was. Coughing still.
But even, like, we like skiing in Michigan, right? You go up north, you go skiing. If you're going down a back trail and you're going through the trees and you're thinking, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, what are you looking at? What's your brain picking up?
Right.
Trees left and right. So if you say stay on the path, like follow snow, whatever it is, that's where your mind's going to focus. And so I would say to that point, like, how are you, hey man, like I want 30 minutes. Can you hit 30 minutes? The standard for our team is 30 minutes a day on film, right? Not during school hours. You know, and let's see who hits that. And
that happened to me a minute ago, by the way. It's like, don't cough, don't cough, don't cough. And so then
you kept coughing.
Having a cough fit. Right. And man, this is going to be a miserable 40 minutes left of this.
It really is like the whole positive behavior reinforcements that you see in schools, right? They all do the PBIS, and there are good and bad parts with that, but ultimately they all want to establish common expectations. They want to use the same language. They want to reinforce the positive behaviors because we do those behaviors when we acknowledge that those behaviors are the right ones. We don't focus on the bad ones. And so a lot of it kind of feels like what schools are trying to do with their PBIS efforts.
Yeah, they are. The difference is that pain is unique in the sense that it changes behavior.
Right.
Like when and that's the other thing too, is like there's a difference between I'm experiencing something uncomfortable because I'm pushing myself to a limit, right? And like I'm experiencing immense amount of pain and I need to relieve it immediately. Like there's a huge difference to that. And that's why you have to put yourself in situations that are difficult and try to reframe some of those things. I frequently try to put myself in situations like that and tell myself, like, hey, one of the things is like a cold ice bath, right? Like it's just water. And my wife and I will get in it like, this is too philosophical. Like, what are you trying to do? It's like, no, but if you really boil it down, thoughts drive our emotions and our emotions drive our behaviors. So if I'm telling myself, this is cold, this is cold, this is cold, this is pain, I don't like this, my emotions and behaviors are going to follow that. If I tell myself it's water, it's water. It's just water. This feels good. It's just water. Eventually you get to this space of like, you're just sitting in there and you don't even care. You know what I mean? And then you're gaining the benefits of taking an ice bath after a 5-mile run,
And so is that what you try to do with your work with teams and kids? You try to put them in those situations. You try to get them to kind of flip their perspective and their thinking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Control your response, right? You can control that. You can't control the other things around you.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things, for any coach that's looking for some great research type stuff. This might not be as much research, but Urban Meyer, whether you like him or not, wrote Above the Line, right?
It's a good book.
Yeah, it's a really good book. And I tell people quite often that came from my understanding is it came from a marriage counselor of all like, you can't control your spouse. You're going to experience things in your marriage that are not going to be great. And how do you respond in a way that gets you to the outcomes of having a great marriage, And it's obviously worked great for him, And what you're doing is you're not only showing vision of what something could be, but on top of that, you're giving them actual behaviors. He talks about ownership, accountability, and responsibility. So in every space, how are you doing these things? One of the things I've talked about with teams is ownership. And that's really tough because kids, well, it's not my fault, But what could you have done to influence it differently? That's all that is. Mm-hmm. You have influence in every situation. What could you do to influence it differently? And you start creating behaviors. And that's the other thing I try to do as well is, here's the vision. Here's what you can do. Here's the specific behaviors we need to have on the field to get to the outcomes we want. In all those behaviors, what do they reinforce? Our identity. Who are we, right? So I know in any given situation, no matter what it is, who we are is X, Y, and Z, and what we do is X, Y, and Z, and then we let the results happen. We let the results play for themselves.
Yeah, you've talked about when it all comes together for like a team or a person or or a group, when like you walk off the field, win or lose or whatever, and you just, that synergy, everything comes together. What's it like for you in your position when you see like a team, quote, get it? Yeah. Or maybe they're understanding the message that you're trying to deliver?
Yeah, I think there's different phases of it. When I'm there, I think that it's fun seeing the team come together and click, right? You see the energy, you can feel it in the room, and all of a sudden it shifts, and you're like, oh man, this could be something. But where the rubber really meets the road is, do they take it onto the field? Do they take it into the court? Do they take it into the community? You know, that's the other thing is, do they go back into the classroom and keep doing the same things they've done before? Or do they really embrace the things that we're talking about? You know what I mean? And where the rubber really meets the road is that first test of adversity, right? Like, do we really believe in this enough to just do what we say we're going to do, you know? And when teams do that, and I don't get to normally see that, I normally get the text messages afterwards or the video clips. And it's like, to me, that's like, I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes. Like, that's what I want kids to feel, because I feel that in the work that I do. You know, when I go and work with them and I'm in the zone and I'm getting them, like, I'm feeling that live energy. Like, I want them to feel that. And the reality is, it happens in sports. And why are sports so impactful? Because it's such a reflection of life. If we can help these kids capture this in 4 years, right? Now we have better mothers and fathers and employers and teachers and leaders moving on in their life. Like, that's a win for everybody.
What are some of the leaders that you've come across that you're just like, this guy gets it. He understands the conversation. He understands, you know, performance, and he understands, you know, feedback, results, all those things. But he really gets, you know, like where we're trying to go with Meraki.
Yeah. There's been some coaches that I've and are really dear friends to me that I've experienced that. I think a couple of people that, you know, for coaches that are like, man, I really want to start working and really learning. One of the best authors you can really get out there is Steve Magnus. He's wrote 2 books, Peak Performance and Do Hard Things. And he really challenges, and it's great, this old perspective, like the Bear Bryant Junction,
Junction like, Boys.
Yeah, like in Bear Bryant, he goes into the book and says, like, Bear Bryant years later was like, that was the wrong approach, you know. And I've experienced that. I've experienced just, you know, grinding kids out to just grind them out doesn't work. You're putting them. You have to understand stress tolerance, and you're putting them so far to the right and in this anxiety, fear, and worry space that there's no development that happens, you know. And so it's really reframing that. And I think for some of those coaches, like, man, this is all a bunch of junk. I don't believe it. Read that.
Have you had that?
I have had that.
Have you had that? Like, they bring you in, or, you know, or even when you were working at Eagle Village, like, did you ever have that where you're just like, you can tell that there's not a grasp of what we're trying to go across?
So, yeah. And I think
why? Like, what do you think is the reason for that?
Well, I will say one, normally it happens in the first conversation, right? Like, you're having a conversation, they're feeling you out. And now that I'm working for myself, it's like, look, I don't have to work with you. Like, I want to work with you. I want to help you. And I'm here for that. Like, I want to see your kids succeed. But at the end of the day, if you don't want to go down this path, then it's not for you. You know what I mean? At least at this point in time. And maybe one day it's somebody else that helps you down the road, and that's fine. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is it's hard to change. You know, if you've been a long time doing anything and you've experienced success, even if that success has kind of faded in the recent years, or it hasn't, it's hard to change from that. You know what I mean? Like, what's the reason to change if I feel like I don't need to? You know what I mean? And all that, I mean, to be honest, is a lot of ego, man. If you put those walls up and you think that you know it all, I mean, I still go every day I'm reading more, I'm learning more, I'm trying to dive into this more, I'm reflecting more on my life. Why? Because I haven't arrived. I'm not finished. You know what I mean? There's more that I have to do. There's more that I can learn. And I, you know, the other night I was just messing around with my kid, and he came up to me. He's like, you know, Dad, he's watching the show Cobra Kai. I don't know if anybody's watched Cobra Kai, but he loves this
Sweep the leg.
Yeah. So he loves this show. And he's like, man, I really think that I'm like this kid in this show. And I'm like, well, why do you think that? And he says, you know, Dad, like, he just wasn't comfortable in his skin. And then that changed. Like, now he's comfortable in his skin. And I was like, what do you think the change was? He goes, I think it was just the way he viewed himself. And I was like, yeah, man.
And your kid's how old? 9.
You know, and it was like one of those moments, like, we've all experienced that. We've all said that to ourselves, but it was just that reminder again for me. Everybody needs those reminders. And it was like one more, I guess, a little bit more of knowing and understanding and living out was like, yeah, he's right, man. You just got to be comfortable in your own skin. It's how you view yourself more than anything.
So we talked about Urban Meyer. What if I reach out to you, to be a consultant for our team, like, I can obviously talk on my experience, like our text messages, they go back and forth throughout the season. I have a lot of coaches who are X's and O's guys, that they really believe in that. Like that's where 85% of this game is played, was the X's and O's. I'm going to make an impact on it. While we're trying to kind of flip that frame of mind of like, how do we capture this kid and drive character through him? What are some takeaways that I'm going to get? So like when I think about Urban Meyer, I think about, no BCD, above the line response, E plus R equals O. Like I'm thinking about those things. Like that's what I took away from that book. What are some takeaways that I'm going to get after one session with you?
Yep.
That I'm able to, stay in front of my team and say, hey, let's hammer these ideas, these ideas like that.
Yeah. I would say if you're a group already that has a purpose, a clarified purpose, I'm going to come in and rally your entire team around that. And we're going to really make that clear through some experiences, but also we're going to reinforce it with some actions and behaviors. So these kids are going to know walking away, like, hey, when I'm in the gym, this is what I need to do to uphold this mission. When I'm in the classroom, this is what I need to do. When I'm out on the field, this is what I need to do. So there's going to be real alignment and cohesion under that. And I'm going to put them in situations that are difficult and uncomfortable. And some of them, it's going to be more about just their focus. And some of them, it's going to be a little more physical to bring out some of that focus, and they're going to experience the fact that when I stay locked in and I'm truly like doing these things from a place of who we are, focused on where we're trying to go, that I'm going to experience that Meraki, that flow state of like, yeah, we can do this. You know what I mean? And then from there, like, I'm going to give you some common language so that you can begin to reinforce these things. And the biggest thing, the coaches that I've seen that have taken, even Urban Meyer's book or the stuff that I'm doing or whoever, right? It's how do you keep doing it over? I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like, I get to help change a perspective and cast a vision and give you some training and experience, but it's what you're doing from there that's impactful. And from our relationship, I'm your biggest fan. I'm texting, yeah, great win. Like, I'm loving seeing you guys get the results, but I also know that you're transforming these young men. I mean, one of the things you said that, just clicked for me, I was like, I love that, is that we're making All-American dads, right? Like we're developing great men to do great things, and it's going to come out on the football field, and then they're going to live it out in life.
Yeah, that's the hope.
So you were mentioning earlier about Eagle Village. You brought that up, and then you're talking about walls. So I was there last spring with Whitehall baseball and softball were there as part of a retreat. And they were climbing walls, doing the ropes course, all those things where it kind of puts you in moments of tension and teamwork and all those things. How much did you learn working there? And maybe not from the physical standpoint, or maybe from the physical standpoint, have you carried over to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think working there was really impactful because Eagle Village is a residential facility as well. So a lot of the stress responses and how your body responds to stress, like I just researched a ton and learned a ton, and then like some of the same types of things, like putting people in different situations and things like that. I think more than anything too is just a great opportunity. That opportunity kind of fell in my lap. I actually went to my boss at Ferris State. My wife and I were pregnant with our third child, and I was like, man, I'm not coming back. Like, I need to be home, I think one of the things, was another experience that I had was coming back from the Final Four, coaching that team, and just having this moment of like, was it worth it, right? Like, we achieved something that was not common at that time at Ferris for a tennis program, right? And it was like, I just felt empty, man. I actually have a picture in my office of right after I hugged my kids getting off the bus, and I just got done crying because it was like, it hit me like, man, my kids weren't a part of this. What was I doing? Where from the external factor, I was rewarded. I had everything that a young 25-year-old would want, right? but it just felt empty to me, So that opportunity was phenomenal in the fact that it gave me the space to begin to explore this and say, who are you? And then when I left there, I had another experience in life, and that's really what just clarified, like, this is your path, man. This is my life and what fulfills me.
That's good stuff. We met with Dan last week. Larry with him and I did, and excited about potentially working with Meraki and our program, and all that stuff about raising All-American dads, and having a kid who's on the team, and wanting all of those things to take place. Coaches sometimes, they just don't have time to do that stuff, or they don't have the resources. They don't have the know-how. And so it's nobody's fault. And it's hard work, right? You're talking about emotions and being secure with who you are, and people can go a lifetime and not experience that clarity that you have. And so I'm excited just to be able to put our kids in that situation potentially, and my kid specifically, to see them kind of grow as young men. So I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, even if people are struggling with that, maybe an example I would give is, I think a lot of times with our kids and social media, also with focus, right? Like their sustained focus is 10 seconds and then they swipe, 10 seconds and swipe, and a lot of times, like, even to those coaches, it's about the X's and O's. Well, that's if you can get them to focus on the X's and O's, I would even say, like, if you ask me, like, hey, Dan, go get a glass of water, right? And I'm like, well, why? For what reason? Like, hey, I need a glass of water, I'm okay. Go to the cupboard, get a glass of water, go to the faucet, and you just keep explaining the steps and everything like that. The piece that's missing is the why. Right? If you were to tell me, and that's the way kids work nowadays, if you were to tell me, hey, Dan, like, you need water, and the reason why you're getting a headache at noon is because you're not drinking water, and did you know 80% of your body is water? And you explain that, okay, what are the steps? Yeah,
Simon Sinek's work about the why is so critical right now, especially with kids, because they're not like they used to be. Like, you tell them to run through a wall, and they just run through a wall. Right. Now it's like, I need the data, and how's this good for me? Which they should, right? And that's what changes the old school kind of coaching that maybe worked then, but I don't see it working now. You have to be able to explain to kids why.
Yeah, and I would even say, like, you look at Jim Harbaugh, right? He came into Michigan, and I actually knew some guys that were on the team, and like, it was very transactional at first, but you see this transformation that he did. And this past year, you see him in press conference, like, I love you, man. I love this. Oh, this guy, this. You see that change, and you see the results on the field. Like, that's not a coincidence.
Right.
It's absolutely not a coincidence.
Right, and there's a lot of like college coaches, just even from rugby. Like, I'm down in this rabbit hole with rugby. I have no clue with UCLA, and he's grateful for everything, entitled to nothing. Like, that is their mantra throughout. So we made wristbands of that. Obviously we're copying. I can't think of anything on my own. But like we're following that piece. But it's just like that grateful for everything, entitled to nothing, and you're like, I wonder why that guy wins. And then you're like, oh wow, look at the amount of national championships he has. And then you think about like a Jim Harbaugh, where maybe he was. Thought he viewed teams this way, and then he kind of made sure that he pivoted a little bit. But why do you think that's throughout all sport? Because you started in tennis. Now you're dealing with dumb meathead coaches like myself, dealing with volleyball coaches, dealing with all these types of coaches. Like, why do you think that is just so? I mean, I know that's easy transformation right to life. But like, what have you seen, with in some of the I guess just the more difficult experiences, in teams that you've had? Like, why do you really truly, believe that like a head coach like that can pivot? Is it because of the result? Do you think he's all about the result, or do you think that there's something else going on there?
No, I think that head coach can pivot if given the experience, right? Like, if given the moment that I'm going to change my focus, or I'm going to look at something else. I'm going to have that transformational conversation that's really tough for me, and I know is tough for that kid, and then he sees that kid transform.
Sees the impact that he had.
The impact.
Yeah.
And again, you know, it goes back to like you guys, the wristbands, everything like that. What are you forming? You're forming an identity. You're forming a team identity, which is where greatness happens. You're forming the community, which is where greatness happens. You have a common purpose, which is how greatness happens. And then you guys are going to live that out and let the results happen for themselves. And the reality is that, are you going to face tough teams? Absolutely. But you're going to control what you can control. You know, I tell teams often there's 2 reasons why you walk off the field without a win, right? You're either lost or you're beat. Okay? And people are like, well, what's the difference? The difference is when you lose focus of who you are. You lose focus of what your purpose is. You lose focus of being in that community, and you're doing it for more than just yourself. And therefore, the self-doubt creeps in, and one bad play turns into another, and then the ref makes a bad call, and now you're looking at all these things, and coaches make, right? And I'm just going to blame everybody, right? Or you're beat. When you have the moment in the flag, you're going to bounce back, you're going to get back to it, and the team was just better that day. And we know when that happens, we can learn from it. But if we have all these different, I'm going to complain about this, that, or another, there's no learning opportunity there, you know?
Have you ever thought about individual sport? You know, like I'm guessing MLB guys probably have their own performance guys. Golf probably has their own performance guys. Have you ever thought about dealing with individual athletes like that? You know, like a Jacob Bushberger who was on our podcast, who's with the Cardinals. Like, have those guys ever reached out and said, like, hey, can you coach me through this, or can we Zoom call through this, or anything along those lines?
So I started doing that for actually a lot of teams that I work with, because all of this started with an individual sport. It started with tennis. It started with literally the mental side of it, and then I realized that none of that mentality can be developed if there's not an environment that cultivates that. And so that's when I really started looking at, how do you cultivate this environment? And that was kind of the transformation of leaving Eagle Village and doing this on my own. Was like, we were training mentality, which was great, and I'd been doing that for a long time. But when you create that culture, like, that's where, as a coach, you're like holding on to the reins, like, hold on, guys. Like, we need to pull this back for a second. You know what I mean? And that's fun as a coach. And very few coaches get to experience that. I've been fortunate enough to experience that. And it's a blast. It's exhilarating.
Would you ever go back?
That's I think of it quite often, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think when my kids are...
Can you coach football?
when my kids are, you know, I committed, even with tennis, like, my kids just started picking up rackets. They're 10, 9, and 5. They just started picking up rackets last year. And one of the things that I think has given me the space to actually develop personally in this way was that I didn't coach a sport specifically. I didn't have the pressure of the result immediately. Like, the pressure was, how do you be a good dad? How do you develop these kids? And so, like, when my oldest boy plays basketball, like, we're not talking about points. You know, like, he just had a game this weekend, and as we were going there, I'm like, hey, man, you want me to coach you up like I do some of these teams? Like, yeah. I'm like, all right, let's mental rehearse here. Let's visualize what you're going to do off the tip-off. Let's visualize this. Let's visualize you high-five. How is it going to feel, right? What music do you want to play? So he turns on his music. I'm like, all right. And he had a great game, you know. He got off the court. We didn't talk about points. I talked about his effort. I talked about his attitude. I talked about him playing one-on-one defense. I talked about him high-fiving his teammates. I talked about him locked in off the bench and who he was looking at and cheering people on. And then we talked about points, right? Like, I was reinforcing those things because those are the multipliers. Like, anybody can teach you how to shoot a basket, right? I want to teach you how to multiply how many baskets you're going to get when you get the opportunity, and how you can multiply others.
Yeah, I think you should reach out to those parents. Yeah. I mean, I really...
I can give you a list of parents that you can talk to.
You might be in the wrong business. You're with teams right now. I think we might want to pivot here and get with, like, some parent, like, groups, like how they read, you know, book reading club, like Meraki Performance Club. Yeah. You know, like, we got to go figure out how to speak to our child, because I'm telling you, you know, these parents want that, you know, the best game of their season, you know, with that type of training.
And I'm starting to navigate that a little bit. This summer, I'm looking at launching some things, but the real thing, and I think that at the heart of Meraki is that team, right?
Oh, 100%.
Because
no, the parent thing would not be rewarding.
I think,
Financially,
I think the other thing goes to, you talk about travel sports and things like that, where it's like we're just going to handpick these kids and throw them together because we want them to play at the college level. We want to do all these things. I don't want to reinforce that because I believe that the kid that's going to be great is going to be great because he gives his whole heart to it.
Right.
And it was that way 10 years ago. I know like Nate McLeod grew up around, or Nate McLeod was older than I was, but he lived around the corner from our house on White Lake Drive. He had a batting cage in his basement, right? Like he was just homegrown in Whitehall, and the dude was just an athlete, and he was a great guy, and he was maximizer of people and trying to bring people with him. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come on this podcast. I just want to show love to West Michigan. Like there's you look at Tony and Nice up at Ferris, 104 guys from Michigan. Right, from Michigan. You look at Davenport, like half their squad's from Michigan. You look at Grand Valley, half their squad's from Michigan. Like we have those athletes here. You know what I mean? We got to just keep them in these communities and celebrate that and let that greatness come out in these communities. Develop great people.
I think that's a great place to finish.
Well, can we do another hour? We did 2 hours last week.
Easily. Yeah, we did. I mean, I could step away and go cough some more if you guys want. So, no, that was fantastic. Very enlightening. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
And before we sign off, we want to thank our sponsors one more time. Grieve Law, Big Stone Therapies, Greener Realty with Chris Dykman and Sarah Reel, North Grove Brewers, Foundation Systems of Michigan with John Botten, Coldwell Banker with Dave Duesenberry, Scheid Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, and their title sponsors, Van Dyke Mortgage Lakeshore, and Durgan Insurance Group. One more shout out to Timothy Miller, who gave us a big pat on the back. He goes, you guys continue to raise the bar on this podcast every week. You guys make Mondays great. So at least we got one fan. That's great. Good to hear. Mm-hmm. And then Chaz Miller. This guy is great. He's the leadership dude I talk to in homeroom every Thursday. Chaz Miller.
Oh, yeah. I know Chaz. Right on.
Doesn't he play basketball at Fremont, I believe?
Yeah.
So, yep, he's in our leaderboard for...
Awesome. Thanks, Chaz.
Timeout. So Fremont's getting you every Thursday?
Yeah.
What I told you... greatness is within community, man.
And you planted yourself in Fremont. Come on, man. You could be just down the road on 120.
There is I beat this like the dead horse, but there is a Spanky's Pizza in Fremont.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Good spot for you.
That's my one-trick pony. Yeah. Every time I bring up Fremont, I know there's other good things about Fremont. So
absolutely.
Don't hold that against me. But yeah. And Sean Hadke gets a comment in there. 100% great stuff. So... But that'll do it for episode 8 of season 3 of the CatchMark Sports Podcast. Thanks again for joining us today, Dan. And see you all next Monday. Have a great week, everybody.